Somewhere in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, a trail camera blinks awake in the middle of a snowy night. The forest is empty, silent, the kind of silence that feels deliberate. And then something moves through the frame, low, fluid, unmistakable. A mountain lion, tan coat, black-tipped tail, muscles working under the skin like the animal isn't even trying. Michigan hasn't had a confirmed wild breeding population of mountain lions in over 100 years. In fact, according to the United States government, the eastern cougar doesn't exist at all. It was formally declared extinct in 2011 and stripped from the endangered species list for good in 2018. On paper, this animal is a ghost. And yet, right now in 2026, wildlife officials in Michigan are confirming more cougar sightings than in almost 2 decades of tracking them. In 2025 alone, the state logged 31 confirmed encounters, the highest number since anyone started counting. 13 more have already been confirmed in the first half of 2026. These aren't random blips scattered across the map either. Year after year, the same handful of Upper Peninsula counties keep lighting up. Baraga, Delta, Dickinson, Houghton, Marquette, Menominee, Ontonagon, Schoolcraft. A pattern stable enough that biologists now suspect certain individual cats are holding down the same stretches of forest for months, maybe years at a time. And buried inside that data is something that has never been documented east of the Mississippi River in over a century. Wild cougar kittens, born in Michigan, surviving in Michigan, and then disappearing completely for 9 straight months, undetected by more than 1,300 trail cameras built specifically to catch them. Nobody can fully explain how these animals are getting there. Nobody can fully explain how they're staying hidden in a state that's actively hunting for proof of them, with equipment specifically designed to find them. And the deeper you look into this story, the less it feels like folklore, and the more it feels like biology quietly outrunning the people trying to study it. Let's start with the contradiction sitting right at the center of this story, because it's a real one, written into federal law. For decades, the U.S. government maintained that a distinct subspecies called the eastern cougar once roamed everywhere from Michigan to Maine, and that it had been hunted into extinction by the early 1900s. In 2011, Fish and Wildlife made that extinction official. But here's the twist almost nobody talks about. When scientists actually reviewed the genetics, they found the eastern cougar was never a separate subspecies to begin with. It was a classification error from 1946 that nobody had bothered to correct for 70 years. Modern DNA can't even tell an eastern cougar apart from a western one. There is functionally one cougar in North America, wearing different regional names: puma, panther, catamount, mountain lion, for an animal that never actually split into a separate eastern branch. So the government spent decades declaring a ghost extinct, while the actual single unified species it was supposedly a variant of kept quietly wandering back into its old territory anyway. Michigan is ground zero for that return, and it's happening faster than almost anyone predicted. To understand how strange that comeback is, you have to understand how thoroughly this animal was erased from Michigan in the first place. Cougars were once native across both of Michigan's peninsulas. The last confirmed wild cougar in the state was killed around 1905 or 1906 in the eastern Upper Peninsula. And it wasn't even shot by a hunter tracking it. It walked into a trap set for wolves. That's how routine predator extermination was at the time. Michigan, like most of the country, ran bounty programs that paid hunters and trappers to wipe out wolves and big cats as fast as possible, treating them as pests rather than wildlife. By the early 1900s, it worked. The cougar was gone, completely. For the next 100 years, Michigan had no wild cougars. Occasional sightings surfaced, grainy photos, paw prints in the snow, rural rumors. But wildlife officials dismissed almost all of them as bobcats, large dogs, or wishful thinking. Old newspaper archives tell a darker version of that folklore. In 1892, a Saginaw County woman left her child sleeping in a wagon while she picked blackberries nearby. She came back to a pool of blood and an empty wagon. Local witnesses at the time blamed a panther, It's the kind of story that reads like myth now, unverified, impossible to confirm more than a century later. But it's a reminder that for the people who actually lived alongside these animals, they were never a legend. They were a fact of daily life, right up until they weren't. Then, in 2008, something changed. The Michigan DNR confirmed cougar tracks in the Upper Peninsula for the first time in a century. It wasn't a fluke. More confirmations followed that same year, and they haven't stopped since. Here's where it gets genuinely fascinating, because this isn't guesswork. It's written in DNA. For years, every single cougar tested in Michigan came back with the same result: male. Everyone. Researchers ran genetic analysis on tissue and scat samples and traced the animals back to a specific ancestral population, the Black Hills region spanning South Dakota, Wyoming, and northwest Nebraska. That's not a neighboring state. That is nearly 1,000 miles away, across open prairie, farmland, and at least 2 other states before an animal even reaches Michigan's border. And the most extraordinary confirmed case of this happening isn't even from Michigan. It's the story that proved this kind of journey was even possible. In 2011, a young male cougar left the Black Hills of South Dakota. Genetic testing later confirmed it. Camera traps and DNA evidence tracked him moving through Minnesota, then Wisconsin, spotted there 3 separate times, then briefly through Michigan, then all the way into New York, before he was finally struck and killed on a highway in Connecticut. Total distance traveled, more than 1,800 miles over roughly 2 years. It remains the longest confirmed dispersal ever recorded for this species anywhere on Earth. For 2 years, that animal crossed farmland, forests, suburbs, and state lines, and almost nobody knew he existed until the moment he died. That's not an isolated freak case. That's the pattern. Researchers now believe most cougars showing up in Michigan and the surrounding Great Lakes states are young males doing exactly what that Connecticut cougar did: walking enormous distances alone, invisible almost the entire way. And sometimes that invisibility breaks in the most unexpected places. In April 2008, a fully grown cougar turned up in Roscoe Village, a dense residential neighborhood 5 miles from downtown Chicago. Nobody had any idea how it got there. Police cornered the animal in a back alley and shot it after it lunged toward an officer. A necropsy and DNA testing afterward confirmed what almost nobody wanted to believe. This wasn't an escaped pet. It was a genuinely wild cougar that had somehow navigated its way into the middle of a major American city without a single confirmed sighting along the way, until it was too late. So if a cougar can cross an entire metropolitan area undetected, it's not hard to understand how one crosses the far less populated stretches of Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula, where there are more deer than people in some counties and thousands of square miles of unbroken forest to disappear into. But that only explains the traveling. It doesn't explain the part of this story that's happening right now that even the scientists tracking it can't fully account for. In March 2025, a Michigan landowner sent the DNR something that hadn't been confirmed east of the Mississippi River in over 100 years. Photographs of 2 wild cougar kittens. Not a lone male passing through. Actual reproduction. A female and cubs in Michigan's Ontonagon County. State biologists called it historic. Possibly the first confirmed wild cougar birth in this entire region since before your great-grandparents were born. And then, the family vanished. Michigan's DNR runs more than 1,300 trail cameras across the Upper Peninsula, specifically to monitor wildlife like this. That's not a hobbyist setup. That's an enormous, dedicated surveillance network generating something like 6 million images a year for a small team of biologists to sort through by hand, on top of photos and videos submitted by ordinary landowners and hunters through the DNR's own public reporting tool. And for 9 straight months, all of it caught nothing. No mother, no cubs, nothing. Then, in December 2025, a private landowner's camera picked them up again. The same mother, the same 2 cubs, now nearly a year old, walking down a snow-covered trail as if nothing had happened. The DNR's own large carnivore specialist, the man responsible for tracking every confirmed cougar in the state, said it plainly. He was surprised. He called it a mystery. An entire cougar family had lived, hunted, and moved through one of the most heavily monitored wildlife regions in the state for the better part of a year. And the surveillance built to catch exactly this kind of animal caught nothing at all. That's the heart of this story, not folklore, not blurry Bigfoot-style photos. A documented, DNA-confirmed, government-monitored predator family that outmaneuvered over 1,000 cameras for 9 months, in real time, recently enough that the researcher who found them is still talking about it. So how are they actually doing this? Not the mystical version, the biological one, and it's almost more unsettling because it's real. A male cougar needs an enormous amount of space to survive, anywhere from 50 to well over 300 square miles of exclusive territory, depending on the region. Male cougars do not share space with other males. When a young male reaches maturity out west, in already saturated cougar country, there often simply isn't room for him. So he leaves. He doesn't scout a destination. He just starts walking, usually at night, instinctively pushing east and north into open, unclaimed ground. Most dispersing males cover somewhere between 45 and 170 miles before settling, but the ambitious, unlucky, or simply relentless ones keep going for hundreds, even thousands of miles more, which increasingly means Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan. Here's the part that explains why an actual breeding population took so long to reappear. Young female cougars almost never disperse that far. They tend to settle close to where they were born, which means nearly every single male that wanders into Michigan arrives completely alone, with no mate anywhere nearby. He can't build a population by himself. He just keeps moving, or he dies trying, which is exactly why decades of confirmed Michigan cougars were, without exception, lone males. Until finally in 2025, one wasn't. And there's another detail most people get wrong about these animals. They're not afraid of water. In Washington state, researchers tracked a GPS-collared young male cougar, nicknamed Nolan, as he slipped into open water at the edge of the Upper Peninsula in the middle of the night and swam nearly a mile without stopping to a small island. Scientists called the discovery totally unexpected. It meant lakes, rivers, and even stretches of open sea were far less of a barrier to these animals than anyone had assumed. In a state like Michigan, defined by lakes, rivers, straits, and peninsulas, that single fact quietly erases a boundary most people would bet their money on. Add one more ingredient: cougars are almost entirely nocturnal, built by evolution to move without being seen or heard, actively avoiding human contact rather than seeking it out. Combine 100+ square miles of range, a willingness to swim, total nighttime stealth, and an instinct to avoid people at all costs, and you get an apex predator that can cross an entire state largely undetected. Not because it's supernatural, but because everything about its biology is built for exactly that. Still, not everyone agrees on what's really happening in Michigan's woods, and that disagreement matters. In 2000, Michigan banned private ownership of exotic big cats, including cougars, grandfathering in people who already had permits. Since then, the DNR has occasionally confiscated illegally kept pet cougars, and officials openly acknowledge that some sightings in the state could be escaped or released pets rather than truly wild animals. It's a real possibility and a responsible one to raise. But not everyone accepts that as the full explanation. The Michigan Wildlife Conservancy, an independent group working with Central Michigan University's genetics lab, says DNA evidence from scat samples confirms wild cougars in at least 7 different counties, more counties than the state's own official confirmed sighting map shows. And they've publicly accused the state of downplaying the scale of what's happening, reluctant to commit to an official management plan for an apex predator quietly reestablishing itself. It's a real ongoing tension between a cautious state agency that wants ironclad proof before making any policy call, and independent researchers who believe the evidence already tells a much bigger story than the official numbers admit. One thing almost everyone agrees on, though: this isn't something to be afraid of. A 2011 continent-wide study covering more than a century of records found only 29 confirmed fatal cougar attacks across the entire United States and Canada since 1890. Michigan's own DNR carnivore specialist has said, bluntly, that you are statistically far more likely to be struck by lightning or hurt driving to work than to ever be harmed by one of these animals. They are not moving into Michigan to hunt people. They're moving in because, after more than a century of complete absence, the habitat, the forest, and the deer population are finally there to support them again. So where does that leave us? An animal the federal government insists doesn't exist as its own eastern species is walking, and now apparently swimming, its way back into a state that erased it more than 100 years ago. One lone, undetectable traveler at a time, until in 2025, for the first time in living memory, one of them didn't leave alone. A family formed. It vanished for 9 months in plain sight of 1,300 cameras, and then it walked back into frame like nothing had happened. Nobody fully knows how many more are already out there right now, moving through Michigan's forests in the dark, completely unseen. The cameras are running, the DNA samples are being collected, and somewhere out there tonight, there's a very good chance one of these animals is walking within a few hundred yards of a road, a farmhouse, a hiking trail, past a camera that will never catch it at all, leaving nothing behind but a single paw print in the snow, gone by morning. A century of bounty hunters, traps, and extermination programs was supposed to have finished the job for good. Instead, one animal at a time, quietly, patiently, on its own terms, Michigan's original apex predator is coming home. If Michigan's mountain lions are rewriting 100 years of extinction right under our noses, the real question isn't how they're doing it anymore. It's how long it's going to take the rest of us to actually notice.